I know I am. I set the clocks forward last night, which means I still went to bed way later than I should have. I was just aware of it. All right, we got the thumbs up. Good morning, class. I'm so proud of you for being here on daylight savings. Are we saving the daylight or are we not saving the? Which one are we now? Did we just turn it off or on? We're in savings. We should just. Did anybody talk to God about when the sun's in the middle of the sky? Because I think that's still noon. So don't forget to tilt your sundial. What is it like? How many degrees would it have to tilt? 10 degrees? No, 30 degrees. Tilt your sundial 30 degrees. 15 degrees? You were just guessing. Yeah. I think that's half an hour. 360 divided by 12? That'd be 30, right? Yeah, 30 degrees. I'm glad we're spending valuable class time on this. Yeah. All right, so we are working our way through the study of the book of Genesis, as you well know. And are we on the second slide? Cool. I haven't given myself that information. I need to make sure I do that in the future. So we've talked about creation quite a bit. We've talked about the place of humanity as sort of one foot on the ground and 1 foot, in heaven, in a sense, as we are both made from the dirt, but as well as God breathed his life into us directly, different than all creation. So we do have a special place, right? Dominion over all of God's creation, but dominion doesn't give us the right to exploit and ruin, right? Adam was to work the soil and make things productive, but that should be in a self-perpetuating way. We talked about the fall into sin and how that is ultimately not a matter of fruit. It's a matter of desiring for ourselves that which God knows is bad for us, desiring for ourselves that which belongs properly to God. They got what they were after, but I can't say that that's any kind of a win, right? So they gained the knowledge of good and evil, and in so doing, evil is introduced to the world, and along with evil is corruption, and corruption ultimately finds its culmination in death. Have you ever thought about what senescence is? Like I don't know if we use this term as much anymore. When I was a kid, I remember hearing the phrase that somebody had died of old age. I think we're a little bit more medically precise these days in how we talk, but it's still basically a real thing, right? Why does that happen, though? Like, what is happening as I'm aging? What's up? Yeah, right. So, I'm well over my 30,000 mile drivetrain warranty at this point, right? Yeah, your parts are wearing out, but what does that mean for something that's biological? Well, the cells that used to copy themselves increasingly copy themselves imperfectly, right? So at every level of your being, there's a degeneration that happens gradually over time. Yeah, copy of a copy of a copy, yeah. Yeah, it is something like that. We could talk about telomeres and stuff like that, but that's not really apropos to our study today. Um, so the natural consequence of sin is, in fact, that things will die. The only solution to death then would be to treat the core root problem, which is sin, right? So when we talk about Jesus coming to bring eternal life, it is not an add-on or incidental that he comes to take care of the problem of sin. Those two things are intrinsically related. And that's why, as Lutherans will say that wherever there is forgiveness of sins, there is life and salvation. We tie those things together. And we don't mean that. See, this is where people having a bigger picture of the Bible really helps you to understand things more deeply. Because people who only kind of have a cursory understanding of Christianity think that what we're hoping for is to be ghosts or angels in heaven, spiritual beings with God forever. We will not be spiritual beings with God forever. Well, you will, right, because you'll still have a spirit, but you will also have a body. We confess this every single Sunday in worship as we talk about believe in the Holy Spirit, the Holy Christian Church, the communion of saints, the forgiveness of sins, the resurrection of the body, right? Because the view of eternal paradise painted by Christianity, painted by the Bible, is not disembodied spirits, but embodied spirits whose body are not subject to the ravages of breakdown and decay. But for that to be a reality, sin has to be dealt with. Does this make sense? Okay. Adam and Eve, we get to Cain and Abel, we get the first murder happens. And I do say murder, it was premeditated. It might have been a crime of passion, but it was still premeditated. Not that there was any court to try him in, but we understand these things. There was a judge, that is correct. And interestingly, what penalty did the judge mete out for the crime of murder? Yeah, exile. He could have very easily taken Cain's life, right? And he would have been justified to do so, but he didn't. As a matter of fact, he does sort of the opposite thing. He puts a mark on Cain and says, I will protect you, and your descendants will flourish for a time. From Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel, from Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel, Seth, there is a rapid descent into ever-increasing wickedness. And that wickedness is described as being violent. Generation after generation, things are getting worse up until we reach the time of Noah. And in Noah's day, things have gotten so bad that God regrets making the world. And he was within his rights to wipe everything away and start over. But he did not. He preserved Noah, his wife, their 3 sons, and their 3 sons' wives. 8 people in the ark. I've made the point with you all that the ark is not a boat, right? It's a box. I shared this point with the religion teacher at Concordia High School a little while back, and she told me recently she was teaching Noah's Ark to the kids, and she shared that insight, and they had a visceral reaction. They wanted to defend that it was a boat really hard. But I'm glad y'all are more amenable in this room. Maybe I've just had more time to lay out the case for you. So God preserves Noah and his family. They just sort of float helplessly other than the help of the Lord. and they get to start over. But already, Noah is wounded in his heart from all that he's experienced. And no wonder, right? And his son tries to make sport of him. And again, there's no harsh punishment here, but Noah does say, "You will not have authority over your brothers. Your brothers will have authority over you." They go their way. Many tribes are coming. We can fast forward a little bit more, and we'll get to the story of Abram, and he and his family, up to the third generation, will take up the rest of the book, essentially. Abram was 75 in his father's house before God called him to leave. I assure you, my son will not be living in my house at 75 without first moving out and making something of himself. If he returns to my house to help me out or to inherit it or whatever, that's fine. But he will not have an unbroken chain of living in my home until he's 75. When we say house, even that's a little bit misleading, because his father, whose name I can't call to memory right now, I'm sorry, had led their family toward Canaan. But they stopped short. They didn't get there. But Canaan is where God was going to lead Abram. And so he calls Abram out of his house. He says, "Take Sarai, your wife, and go." And he takes Sarai, his wife, as well as his nephew Lot and Lot's wife. And they all go together. They go into Canaan, pass through Egypt. Abram lies about his 65-year-old haughty wife, saying, "This is actually my sister." And Pharaoh takes her as a wife, and terrible things afflict Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says to Abram, "Your God is punishing me. Why did you do this to me?" And so Abram comes clean. Pharaoh sends him on his way with a suite of lovely parting gifts. Probably amongst that is a handmaiden for Sarai. Foreshadowing. As they leave Egypt, they settle down, and they are so lousy with herds and wealth and stuff that Abram's servants and Lot's servants are bickering with each other over the land. So Abram says, "Well, I'll tell you what, it's a big land. Let's just cut it down the middle, and then you pick a side, I'll pick a side, we'll spread out." So Abram cuts the cake, and Lot picks his slice, right? So Lot says, "I'm going to go over there. I think the land is better. It's a valley, plus there's some civilization over there. Maybe I can go make some friends." Lot seems to be a very insecure person to me. I don't know for sure. He's at least not what you'd call self-sufficient. So Lot goes and he settles by the big city over there. Abram goes over here. He's digging wells, praising God. He's having a grand old time. A region-wide war breaks out, and the people with whom Lot has settled get conquered. Lot and his family are taken prisoner. Abram hears that. He whistles up a posse of 300 guys. They go in to the camp where Lot is being captive, and they whoop him real bad. They're on the run. Abram gets Lot and his family out. And after the battle's over, two of the local kings who had been opposed by the people that Abram just beat meet with Abram. One is Melchizedek, the king of Salem, which may be Jerusalem, and it might not be. But the king of Salem, and a high priest and a priest of the Lord Most High. Fascinating. Right? As well as the king of Sodom, who could not be any more different from Melchizedek. Melchizedek, his only interest is in blessing Abram for what he has done. The king of Sodom, on the other hand, is trying to split the spoils with Abram after his victory. And I'm not 100% sure, but it seems like to me, by rights, all those spoils would belong to Abram. But the deal the king of Sodom makes is, hey, why don't you take all of the material possessions, all the wealth, and leave me the people as slaves, and we'll call that even. And Abram says, I would rather not be associated with you. I will not let anybody say that you have made me rich. So you keep everything. We're just going to call the bill even for whatever food my people ate. That's it. They part ways. Now, Lot comes back with Abram and gets away from Sodom and all their wickedness, and they settle down and serve the Lord with joy and gladness, right? No, Lot goes back, settles in Sodom. I wrestle with what any of this means, right? Like, knowing the story of Sodom that's going to come, is Lot just concerned about finding husbands for his daughters? Is that the deal? Like, is that why he doesn't want to settle away like Abram's doing? I don't know. Well, God has affirmed his promises to Abram several times. He has cut a covenant with Abram that Abram, now Abraham, will have a massive lineage. From him will come great nations. And never mind that, all the peoples of the earth will be blessed through him. And in cutting this covenant, there are some sacrificial animals that get split in twain, and usually the two parties would walk in between as a sign that they both understand the severity of the covenant and all that sort of stuff. But in this case, Abraham watches as a flaming fire and smoking pot do the walk alone. And what is the flame and the smoking pot? What do these things represent? The presence of God, right? And an interesting foreshadowing of the Exodus. We're not going to get to the Exodus in the book of Genesis. That happens in the book of Exodus, right? But you will recall in Exodus, by day, the presence of God was seen as a pillar of smoke or a cloud, right? And then by night as a fire, as a flame. The slavery in Egypt was foretold to Abram back when the covenant first came to him. He said, I'm going to do this, and you're going to inherit this land, although your descendants will spend 400 years as captive. I will bring them back and settle them in this land. It was all in there back in Genesis. And again, we see God reaffirming his presence and his covenant. And since Abraham doesn't pass through, only God does, then really the whole weight of the covenant is resting on God or Abraham? God. Abraham and Sarah are still childless and both getting antsy. And Sarah suggests, maybe God promised this thing to you. Maybe what he meant was you and somebody else. How about, why don't you take my handmaiden Hagar as your wife? Maybe it's through her that we're going to get kids. How does this work out? Yeah. Would any of you ladies in the room think that that's a bright idea to offer a younger woman to your husband? No? For all the reasons you're assuming, it was not a good idea. And husbands, don't you dare ask. That was not permission. I'm trying to prove that it's a bad idea. Okay. So Hagar does get pregnant real fast. And she's feeling real good about herself and kind of gloating and making Sarah feel bad. And Sarah's like, hey, do something about her. And Abraham says, no, you do something about her. And so she mistreats her badly. Hagar runs off. God pursues Hagar and says, it's going to be okay. Go back. I'll take care of you and your son. God comes back and reaffirms his covenant with Abraham and says, it is not through some other woman, it is through you and Sarah that you will have the descendants of many nations. And Sarah, listening in, laughs. Because at this point she's 90, about 90. And God's like, why are you laughing? And she's like, because I'm not laughing. He's like, you are laughing. You're going to call your son Laughter, actually. You name him Isaac, which means laughter. I'll be back here within a year. You'll have a son. In the intervening times, Abraham and Sarah meet with Abimelech, who's another local king. And Abraham says, hi, I'd like for you to meet my sister, Sarah. I skipped over to the destruction of Sodom. So after God talks to Sarah, says Isaac, all that stuff. Before God leaves, he's like, oh yeah, one more thing. Should I tell Abraham about what's going to happen to Sodom? And so he tells him, destruction's coming. And Abraham says, well, I know some people there. If you find 50 people, 50 righteous people, will you spare Sodom? And God's like, sure, yeah. Well, okay, but what about 45? Yeah, 45, absolutely. 30? 20? Yep, 10. What if you only find 10 righteous people? Yeah, I'll spare the city for 10 people. How many righteous people does he find in Sodom? Four? I think you've overbid. One? I think you've probably overbid. I would not characterize anybody in that story as righteous. I mean, even Lot, who is trying, still not great, man. The city is thoroughly wicked. In ways that would get a YouTube video demonetized real fast. We're not monetized. I don't care about that. But yeah, it's rough. And so God, the angels, before destruction comes, they usher out Lot, his wife, and their 2 daughters. Their sons-in-laws to be laugh at the opportunity to escape. So, Lot, his wife, his 2 daughters are led out by the hand. Literally describes that the angels have to grab them and bring them because they are so reluctant to leave. So the angel's dragging them along, and of course Lot's wife looks back and she is instantly killed. Lot and his 2 daughters make it out, and his daughters, fearful that God's providence has ended there, I suppose, decide that if they're ever going to have kids, they have to be with their dad. So they take advantage of him twice. And that's sort of the end of the story of Lot for now. But we know that things will not go well with those children. That brings us up to Abraham and Abimelech. Again, he does the whole, this is my sister, not my wife thing. And Abimelech welcomes her in as a wife, which I think might be a matter of compassion more than lust at this point. I mean, she's 90, guys. Let's own this. Um, and he does not prevail upon her physically. And God comes to Abimelech in a dream and says, because of you taking this woman, you are a dead man, and your whole people as well. And so Abimelech confronts Abram and says, why'd you say this? He says, well, yada, yada. And he's like, well, look, I have not touched your wife. We're going to let her go. Okay, you take her with my blessing. It's all good. And when that happens, Abimelech and all his people are healed and restored, and everything is good again. We're going to come back to Abimelech in a little bit. Last week we got just to the birth of Isaac, so let's go there and keep going. The Lord visited Sarah as he said, and the Lord did to Sarah as he had promised. And Sarah conceived and bore Abraham a son in his old age, at the time of which God had spoken to him. Abraham called his son who was born to him, whom Sarah bore, Isaac, which means laughter. Talked about that. Abraham circumcised his son Isaac when he was 8 days old. Sarah said, God has made laughter for me, and everyone who hears will laugh over me. Now, one would hope that she could be part of the joke, right? Like, yes, this is ridiculous, and that's okay. And that's what makes it amazing. But, get down to verse 8, that's where we're going to pick up for today. Talking about Isaac. The child grew and was weaned, and Abraham made a great feast on that day Isaac was weaned. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had bore to Abraham, laughing. So she said to Abraham, cast out the slave woman with her son, for the son of this slave woman shall not be heir with my son Isaac. And the thing was very displeasing to Abraham on account of his son. Like, yeah, she's laughing at you. You knew this would be the thing. And you should just laugh along with her. If it seems incredible, if it seems silly, if she's not sure how a 90-year-old is going to keep up with a toddler, she's probably right. But God provided for you so far, and this is a testimony, right? You can laugh along, but she doesn't. So Sarah seems to be still very much bound up in her pride, and maybe it's just a personal beef with Hagar, which is understandable, but still her fault. Whose idea was the begetting of Ishmael? It was Sarah's idea in the first place. Abraham doesn't want to put out Ishmael. That's his boy. Verse 12. But God said to Abraham, do not be displeased because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you. For through Isaac shall your offspring be named. And I will make a nation of the son of the slave woman also, because he is your offspring. So Abraham rose early in the morning, took bread and a skin of water, and gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder, along with the child, and sent her away. And she departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. So, Sarah's motives aren't great. And if I thought that I knew everything that God knows, it would be really easy for me to say that God is handling this wrong. Shouldn't Abraham take some accountability? Shouldn't Sarah take some accountability? Shouldn't they reconcile and work all this out? But the thing is, God has a plan for Ishmael and Hagar. A plan that I'm not privy to. Abraham's not privy to. And so, and this happens, right? We talked about this in the sermon last week. There's things that God knows that we don't necessarily understand, but we need to be able to trust him when he's making choices that are different than the choices that we think he should. So he sends Hagar away, verse 15. She's going to Beersheba. File that away in your mind for later. It hasn't been named Beersheba yet. It will be. We're going to hear the story of when it's named Beersheba in a little bit, but we'll get there. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the child under one of the bushes. Then she sat down opposite him, a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot, for she said, "Let me not look on the death of the child." And as she sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and wept. Can you imagine? She's taken from Egypt, her homeland. She's with this ridiculous old couple. She gets made a wife. She gets put away. She has a child that she didn't really ask for, but And then she's sent away, and she's got some bread, skin of water. And she uses up the skin of water. Has this been a day or two, 3? I don't know. But it's not like she can go to the local convenience store and stock up or whatever. Like, this isn't even a lack of money problem. This is basic human needs problem, right? So she's going to lose her baby. And she's also going to die. And so she's preparing for that, right? But she's full of grief and heartache. But God had told Abraham, "I'm going to take care of these folks." I don't know if Hagar knew that yet. I don't know if Abraham said, "It's going to go away, but it's going to be okay. God will take care of you." I don't know if she knew any of that, or if that just was privately for Abraham. But it doesn't look like God's coming through. So she lifted up her voice and wept. God heard the voice of the boy. The angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Fear not, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Up, lift up the boy, hold him fast in your hand, for I will make him into a great nation." Not a very articulate prayer, was it? Just weeping and sobbing. Interestingly to me, God doesn't even say to her, "I have heard your weeping." He says, I heard the voice of the boy. I don't know if anybody's calling out to God. Maybe. They're just calling out in suffering, but God has compassion. And he's going to be faithful to his promise. So he tells her, you go get your boy. I'm going to take care of you now. Scripture sometimes calls God Father to the fatherless, right? And that's a nice sentiment. But we can see that it's actually true of him historically and in his character. So she goes, picks up the boy, I presume. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. I want you to think about this for a minute. She is going to die of thirst. Do you think she hadn't looked carefully for a well? Presumably, the path that she walks is from where she is to where she was, because she's going back to pick up her kid. Was there a well there the whole time? Maybe. Maybe not. One would think if you are, the portrayal we usually get is like the idea of the mirage, where like you're seeing water everywhere that it isn't. If she had walked by a well, man, don't you think she'd notice? Whether this is a pre-existing well or whether this is a well that God is gifting to her. One way or another, God provided it, showed it to her. And with that well comes hope and a future. Yes, sir. Yep. Um, no, no, yeah. Yeah. It does make you wonder, right? It does make you wonder. Yeah, I'll have to, you know what? Let me go back and do math, and I'll come back to you next week with it. Because I always picture him to be a teenager too, but this definitely sounds like he's a toddler, you know? Yeah, it almost sounds like an infant, but that wouldn't track. Um, or is it, is it just, she's a grown woman and he's still a young man, right? But he succumbed to the heat before she did, you know? And so she lays him down, and God's saying, well, go pick him up because he's wiped out. I don't know. And God was with the boy. Oh, okay. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. And God was with the boy. And he grew up. He lived in the wilderness and became an expert with the bow. He lived in the land of Paran, and his mother took a wife for him from the land of Egypt. So that means that his children are going to be 3/4 Egyptian, right? So he's going to be, they'll be practically Egyptians, right? But they're not going to live in Egypt. They're going to be in Paran. Um, we heard earlier that there are great nations that are going to come from him. They were enumerated earlier in the text. Verse 22. At that time, Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, said to Abraham, God is with you in all that you do. Now, therefore, swear to me here by God that you will not deal falsely with me, or with my descendants, or with my posterity. But as I have dealt kindly with you, so you will deal with me, and with the land where you have sojourned. And Abraham said, I will swear. I think, so first off, so far, Abimelech has been a very stand-up dude, right? But the foundation of this request doesn't come from him saying, Abraham, I can see that you are mighty and powerful. Abraham, I see that you are wise above all men, or fabulously wealthy. Abimelech says, God is with you in all that you do. So I would like to be on your side. Abimelech is trying to strike this covenant because of his fear of the Lord, not because of his fear of Abraham. And I think that's worth noting. And Abraham, for his part, says, yeah, let's do that. But they have some things to sort out first. Abraham reproved Abimelech about a well of water that Abimelech's servants had seized. And Abimelech said, I don't know who has done this thing. You didn't tell me, and I have not heard until today. So Abraham took sheep and oxen and gave them to Abimelech. And the two men made a covenant. Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock apart. And Abimelech said to Abraham, what's the meaning of these 7 ewe lambs that you have set apart? He said, these 7 ewe lambs you will take from my hand, that this may be a witness for me that I dug this well. Therefore, that place is called, what? You have it? Beersheba. Because there both of them swore an oath. Hold on. Where was the well that Hagar settled at? She departed and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba, and there she found a well. Now, I'm trying to understand what's happening in this story. Is this a well that Abraham previously dug? Yeah, maybe. But in the intervening time, some of Abimelech's men have seized it. And so here in negotiation, Abraham kicks them off of the well. Maybe. And then if that's the case, then, because it says it's around the same time, right? Are these men who had laid siege over who'd claimed the well for themselves, are they getting run off just about the time that Hagar is in need of water? Did she not see it before because hostile strangers were encamped around it and she didn't go there? I don't know. The story doesn't connect the dots for us that cleanly. It does seem telling to me that all this stuff is happening around the same time. What's more, would Abraham have any way of knowing that Hagar was there, needed the water? Maybe in the vaguest terms, he saw which way she went, but I don't know if that was on the forefront of his mind. Beersheba, by the way, they said they named it Beersheba because there they swore an oath. And Beersheba is probably a bit of a, I don't want to say pun, but like a double entendre. Bear for well, Sheba sounds like 2 different words. One is the word nishba, which is to swear. But then the other one is the word for 7, Sheba. So it's the oath of swearing, but also like, hey, remember I gave you those 7 sheep as a sign to you there? So they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech and Phicol, the commander of his army, rose and returned to the land of the Philistines. Abraham planted a tamarisk tree in Beersheba, and there called on the name of the Lord, the everlasting God. And Abraham sojourned many days in the land of the Philistines. That's an interesting little note there, too. So far, we've seen Abraham digging wells, and if you own a well in the land, then you're pretty much the owner of the land. That's the way it worked in the ancient times, right? It's like, hey, I dug this well. This is my land. Digging wells is not easy, and if you don't get it right, you've just expended a lot of effort for nothing, right? Um, but also, there's another thing that we've seen him do a lot of, which is as he travels, he builds these altars. And whenever he builds an altar, he worships the Lord. And those altars are like enduring testaments of God's presence with him, right? You know, it's a testimony. Hey, I was here, and God was with me here. I built an altar here, and there's a place to worship God. He does something here that I don't remember reading him doing anywhere else so far, which is here he doesn't dig a well or build an altar. He plants a tree and worships God there. I don't know, if this is meant to be. I have to think it's symbolic. If you put a stone in place, it'll stand there, unless somebody moves it, it'll stand there for forever. But if you plant a tree, if it's a seed, it's invisible, and if it's a sapling, it's, whatever, little. But what will happen is over time and over generations, the tree will grow to be great, flourish. And when we diagram our lineages, the picture we draw is called a what? Family tree. And, is this Abraham making a testament to what God is doing? Abraham will not have 1,000, 1 million first generation sons. He has Isaac, Ishmael. Somehow, from Isaac, more is going to come. We've seen around the bend a little bit. Isaac has 2 sons, Jacob and Esau. That's it. And then from Jacob, we get a dozen. That's still not many nations. It's going to take time and generations before this little sapling becomes a great tree. Don't have time to tackle this story, but let's read a little bit. Let's get all the way through verse 4, and then I'll point you toward the book of Hebrews briefly, and then we'll do the story more properly next week. This is Genesis 22, starting in verse 1. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, and he said, Here I am. He said, Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, if you want, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. He cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then he said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. I'm going to read that quotation again. I want you to listen carefully. And we have some decisions to make. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. What is Abraham saying? We'll go and worship and then come back. But didn't God tell him he's going to sacrifice his son on the mountain? It would be very possible, reading the story right now, to think one of several things. Either Abraham doesn't plan on going through with it, or Abraham is lying to these guys so they won't stop him. There's a third option that is not obvious to me when I read the story. Hebrews 11, verse 17, so this is in the New Testament. Hebrews 11 says, "By faith Abraham, when he was tested, offered up Isaac. And he who had received the promises was in the act of offering up his only son, of whom it was said, 'Through Isaac your offspring shall be named.'" Remember, God was specific about that. It's through Isaac that you're getting more offspring. He considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. I would have missed that in the text. I would not have guessed that. But if the author of Hebrews is right, and I have every reason to think he probably knows more than me, yeah, and what we'll see, spoilers if you don't know the story yet, what we'll see is Abraham is prepared to go through with it. He's in the act of going through with it. Yeah, he was committed. Yeah. Now, one more thing I want to point out to you, because we just did this in our last sermon series on 2 different weeks. When God the Father speaks about Jesus, he refers to him as, "This is my beloved Son." When God speaks to Abraham about the sacrifice that Abraham has to make, he says, "Take your son, your only son, Isaac, whom you love." It is important that you know that God has known the plan of salvation at least from the moment that sin entered into the world. And we know that because of how he spoke to Adam, Eve, and the snake. And so much of what unfolds in the history is to help us see what God has planned, and to help us to recognize that when Jesus comes and does all that he does, he is the fulfillment of all that stuff that God had been revealing to us bit by bit all along. So I don't know what a father offering up his beloved son on a mountain as a sacrifice has to do with Jesus, but maybe next week we'll figure it all out. Sound good? All right. Well, why don't you go freshen up your coffee, do what you need to do, come on back, and we got worship coming up in 5 minutes and 35 seconds.